Starting. Hey there, everybody. I know that was a strange, silent start to our new year, but that doesn't mean it's going to be quiet around here. This, of course, is Jay Frost speaking to you from the Philanthropy Masterminds series. I've been privileged to host this series since 2016. And as we enter this new year, I hope that you're as filled with excitement as I am about everything that's going on in the world of philanthropy and fundraising and the nonprofit sector generally here and around the world. And I'm going to be bringing to you a whole host of exciting people who are leaders in the field. And we start to kick that off today with a conversation with Hardy Smith, who you can probably see there in the corner in just a moment. But I also want to welcome you and thank you for taking time to hang out here as we have these conversations. There is going to be quite a few of them this year. So I want you to keep an eye on the calendar, if you will. You can do that by going to DonorSearch.net. Again, that's DonorSearch.net. That's our sponsor. They have been all along the path, generously giving us space to have these great conversations with you and with our guests about this world of philanthropy and fundraising and social good. And the entire calendar for all these conversations is over there under the resources tab. There's a new Philanthropy Masterminds page and Philanthropy Masterminds channels on all your favorite social media sites. So please look for those, find the sessions that you want to attend, gather up your questions, and get ready to jump into the middle of great conversations like you will today on this subject of course, the frustration that I'm sure you have about why those board members aren't doing what you want them to do. And by the way, it's not always that simple, as we're about to discuss and find out. But before we go there, the chat's open to you and the Q&A is open to you. And please feel free to use them. We want you to be a part of this. So with that, I want to welcome you. Hardy, thank you so much for being the first guest of 2024. It's so great to see you.
Jay, thank you so very much for this fantastic opportunity. I've been looking forward to this for a while, so I really appreciate it. And Happy New Year to you and everyone in the audience today. So I think we're gonna have a fun conversation.
I agree. And for those who don't know your book, they are not going to miss it if they're watching this as well as listening to it. And that's, of course, Stop the Nonprofit Board Blame Game. That's just one piece of your world, but it's an important one for this conversation today. Before we go any further, where did the title come from for the book?
I'm sorry,
How did you come up with that title?
Well, I really have to credit my publisher for the creative team with Greenleaf Book Group for coming up with the final title. And as you see, the fingers of two fingers of blame pointing at each other, and we'll get into that and where that came from.
Right. And I like the fact that the graphic, and I don't know if that was you or the publisher who came up with that, it's lightning in between. So there's a lot of heat and light, hopefully, that comes from a little bit of conflict. We have a lot to talk about. And before we begin that whole discussion about this frustration, do you mind telling us a little bit about your background? You have a big NASCAR background, but also a huge background with working with nonprofit boards and other kinds of boards. So can you talk a little bit about your background, then how that contributed to your interest in this topic and your decision to write this book?
Oh, certainly. And if I might, may I before I answer that question,
Yeah.
if may I go ahead and invite our audience to just please share in the chat. Just are you experiencing frustration around your board members not fundraising? And just let us know. Yes, okay, pretty strong. So that'll really help. Okay,
Oh,
cool.
yes.
It's coming in hot.
Absolutely. Yes.
So and we'll come back to that. And any specific questions that you have, please submit those. Jay's going to be watching those, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. And thank you for that involvement. My background is a little bit different. I'm not a nonprofit world lifer from a professional staff person, so to speak. My professional background is in NASCAR racing. So about 30 years in that high performance world, not a driver. So if some of you I get that question all the time. Well, who did you drive for? What was your number? Usually there's a lot of disappointment when they find out, well, no, I wasn't anybody you ever heard of. I was a back of the house guy, and I worked nationwide for the NASCAR companies, and I was a problem solver. And my very simple job description was Hardy, recognize problems before they existed and make sure they don't happen. And then, by any chance, if something slipped through the cracks, Jay, I was darn better sure to come up with a solution and get it fixed, and quickly. I was involved in some of the building and construction and development of some of the largest sports and entertainment facilities in the country. Again, worked nationwide, solving problems for the company. So, and is a parallel track. I have had a lifelong involvement with nonprofit organizations, multiple leadership roles, boards, presidents, volunteer presidents, work with associations across the country. And then also, not only from a personal standpoint, that was also a part of my role with NASCAR in community relations. So working with organizations. So excuse me, there was a tie-in to all of that. Then after leaving the NASCAR world, starting my own consulting business, professional speaking business, work focusing on nonprofits. I now bring that a different mindset. The NASCAR mindset is a very competitive mindset. It's a very contrarian mindset, and it's not accepting results that you see without test and verify. And so even every week when that winning team pulls into victory lane, as soon as they get the car back to the shop, they're going to tear that car down. They want to know why they won so they can replicate it the next week, right? Well, if you were from second back to 40th, if you've ever seen Talladega Nights, Ricky Bobby says, well, that's just your first loser if you're second. So they're gonna tear their car down to find out why didn't they win. So that's the mindset that I bring. So taking a look at nonprofits, what are maybe some of those best practices that we as a sector continuously anchor to, but they don't get the results that we're hoping for. So we all know that famous question about, well, what do you call it when you're trying the same things over and over and expecting a different result, right? So I see a whole lot of that in the world of nonprofits, and that ultimately led me to pursue the quest that I've been on to find an answer to why don't board members do what they're supposed to do. And it's been a very interesting journey along the way, and I think I've found some answers.
And we want to hear about the answers, but I do want to ask you before we go any further. You talked about this thing about deconstructing the car when it comes in for the finish, whether you're first or you're 40th. And I'm wondering, are you applying that mindset as well to this problem? So that, in other words, even if you found a solution that works, and we want to hear some solutions that do, because everybody has this problem, do you need to constantly revisit what those solutions are so that they work for your individual board and those individual board relationships?
Absolutely. And we all go to conferences and conventions. We all listen to speakers and trainers and of people like me, and they've all got the latest, greatest. Here's a way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And you come back home and you start trying to implement that. And you also look across the sector over the last, decade or so, and here are the best practices. Well, my suggestion is, okay, if they work for you, great. But if they're not working for you, is it possibly time that you need to rethink your approach to your board relationships? And I'll be sharing some specifics on that. But at the same time, I also suggest every organization is unique.
Mm-hmm.
Every board setting is unique. And we know that there are different stages in the development, the evolution of boards. There are different sizes of organizations where board expectations can, from a small local startup nonprofit where it's hands-on, everyone is doing everything, much different than perhaps the large nationally based nonprofit organization that's got budgets into the tens, hundreds of millions of dollars. We know all of that. So I think it's important to keep things into perspective, and even me, take what I suggest with a grain of salt, test it out, make sure it works. I'm confident you're going to get some results, but I think it's important to do that.
I know that we also, as you just suggested, we have a lot of comments here when you just asked everybody, do you have a frustration? And a couple of people talked about what kinds of frustrations they have. I think that would be helpful to hear more about too. Do you agree?
Absolutely. So if there's some specifics on particulars of just what exactly is driving your frustration with your board. And I know our topic today is around fundraising, but I'm understanding that there's a little bit of latitude in maybe some different frustrations.
That's right, and we can tackle all those things. So I guess probably first we need to talk a little bit about the frustration itself, and then we can dig into some of these things you all are listing here. So please keep them coming. This is really great. Thank you everybody for those. I know that one of the things we talked about before we began today is what responsibility do maybe the nonprofits themselves have for the frustration? So can you talk about that a little bit, and how the perspective of the board members and the nonprofit staff and leadership and so forth, maybe a little bit, I don't know, not out of sync?
That's a great question, Jay. Thank you. I think it's important. And again, for our audience, I'm here to help you. I'm not here to beat up on you. But in relationships, anyone that's been involved in a personal or business relationship knows it's a two-way street. But your responsibility is what can you do to help the relationship, strengthen the relationship? So let me kind of go to that point for just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Just give yourself a pause and to reevaluate. Ask yourself, are you doing everything that you can do to have a better, stronger relationship with your board members? And I can almost feel like, well, yeah, sure I am. It's their fault, right? Well, remember, there's two fingers in the blame game. But what can you do? And I'm going to, just jumping ahead a little bit. For example, one of the top reasons that good board members have shared with me in my research, that they've shared with me is the number one reason they turn off. I'm talking about the good ones. They turn off is poor communication. I'm not talking about frequency. So, for example, okay, yeah, you write newsletters, you send emails, you have annual reports, you got monthly reports, you communicate at board meetings, but they're not responding. So I saw in one of the chat questions comments about not responding to emails, even the short ones. So it's about, are your communication techniques effective? Are they effective? Not about just continuously blasting out. And if you're not getting responses, and people aren't reading your reports, they're obviously not, they're coming to the meetings, they have not read those reports, they have not read the minutes. I understand that's on them, but can you take a different approach to being a more effective communicator? And how could you do that? How could you do that?
Hardy, can you talk a little bit about what that looks like? What does effective communication look like from a board member's perspective?
Absolutely. So number one, let me answer that question, that prompt, that rhetorical question.
Sure.
Is ask your board members, how can you be a more effective communicator? And I'm suggesting one-on-one conversations. I'm not suggesting just mass, in a board meeting, hey, how can I be a better communicator? Here's something that's important to understand. And in the book, Stop the Nonprofit Board Blame Game, I spend a lot of time in sharing how-tos on how communication works, how you can be a better communicator. So here's some quick things to take away today. Number one, it's important to understand, just visualize right now, everyone that's in the audience today, just visualize your board room and all the faces sitting around the board table. Can you see those? So if you've got 12 board members, 20 board members, 50 board members, well, if you got 50, bless your heart, but that's another topic. But can you visualize all those faces? Okay, good. Now, every single one of those individuals has a different communication preference. And what I mean is they have different communication styles, how they communicate, how they prefer to be communicated with, the platforms that work for them on their choice. So some quick such as is, some board members are fine with emails, some a text, some a phone call, some an advance one-on-one meeting on an important topic, not every single agenda item, but advanced communication effort. So, what I've just probably triggered, great, Jay, you got a guy on here talking about, I have to do more work. Well, NASCAR driver Dale Earnhardt Jr. says, how bad do you want it? Ask, how bad do you want it? So if you want effective communication, how badly do you want it? And some want bells and whistles, some want PowerPoint, some want videos. So how can you best understand their different preferences and do the best you can on appealing to those different preferences, and that is going to help. So in your orientation sessions with new board members, current board members, just ask them, how do you prefer to be communicated with? And if they're not responding to your emails, it tells me a couple of different things. Number one, they don't value what you're communicating, and that's critical. So I know I feel your pain about being frustrated because your emails aren't being responded to. I'm working with an organization right now that is going through that kind of a transition, that board members just simply haven't responded. The reason they haven't been responding to communications is there's like nothing. There's nothing in the tank for a relationship. So just let's go personal with this. So if you're at home with your partner, and there's crickets, you're communicating, you're talking, and there's no responses. Doesn't that tell you something? Right? If you're in business, if your business partners aren't responding to you, it's the same thing. So we've gone a little bit deep on effective communication, but that's, anyone who is in a long-term relationship understands that there are keys to a successful relationship. We know about trust, we know about commitment, we know about time, and there are a couple of other key important factors. But showing appreciation, but the number one, hands down, is effective communication.
Hardy, there's something that came up in the chat that I think deserves attention, and it starts with this issue of communication, but I think it really speaks to an issue potentially also of time and expectations. The expectation board members might have of staff, also the expectations that staff might reasonably have of board members. And it's Scott's point that it's frustrating and unreasonable on board members to communicate via text, not respecting time boundaries, like after business hours, and text messages also, and this is something that board members may not know, of course, that being very hard to upload into donor databases to capture communications and then be able to follow up on them. So I know this gets a little granular here with Scott's comment, but I think that what he speaks to is both an issue of the limited we have of time at the staff level and resources that we might have, the inflexibility of our resources, but also the need to get board members to do whatever it is that we think they need to be doing and what maybe they want to be doing. So how do you balance some of that so that it can be appropriate, and also maybe break down those unreasonable expectations that maybe board members and staff have of one another?
One of the key mistakes that my work and feedback from board members has shown me, that we don't get clarity on expectations. And quite often, we as an organization have unrealistic expectations. I was working with the Florida Association of Chamber Professionals and doing a session on board engagement. So I did a pre-conference survey. What's your number one issue? And it was kind of interesting. Well, our board members aren't coming to after hour socials. They're not coming to ribbon cuttings. They're not coming to, and it was just like this long list. And so I said, okay, I see a big trend here. Totally happy with board member attendance at board meetings, major fundraisers, those kind of things. So I said, folks, when your board members sign up, in this case, it was Chamber of Commerce professionals, but wouldn't this apply to everyone in the nonprofit sector? Do you think realistically they're signing up to be 24-hour a day board members for your particular organization? And the reality is not very many of them are quite that dedicated. So what are the expectations? And my suggestion is that if you consider your board and board members as high value assets, and how can you best utilize your high value asset that the board members represent? And what are the things that you need for them to be focused on the most? So if it's strategic visioning, if it's fundraising, what are the most important things? So if it's possible that they're not showing up for ribbon cuttings or open houses or those kind, I'm not trying to poo-poo those things by any stretch of the imagination. Is it possible then being frustrated because 100% of your board members aren't showing up for all those things? That maybe there's a rotating schedule. Designated board members have, okay, Jay, you're the designated board member this month for showing up at whatever we need for extracurricular activities we need for you to represent the board on. Would that make sense?
Mhm.
Are there other opportunities for representing the organization that other volunteers, non-board members, could participate in? And that kind of leads to helping develop a farm club for future board members. Oh, okay. Well, Jay was really been active as a volunteer. He's showing up for all these. Maybe possibly somewhere down the road, could he be a good board member? So let me tie this up for our audience. You've only got so many asks that are going to be responded to. So I'm suggesting be judicious in the number of asks that you're asking your board members, whether it's participation, whether it's writing checks, whatever it is. But let me challenge you to think differently about that engagement. What are the expectations? Now, here's where the problem kind of, is it okay to kind of evolve here in the conversation, Jay?
Please go ahead.
Jay, here's what I see that doesn't happen. The conversations around oh, Scott, you're awesome. High five. So high five, Scott. Who should set those expectations? Here we go. Thank you, Scott. So two sets of people, audiences here. So number one, potential board members. All right. So if your board has agreed to a set of expectations and they've all committed. All right. So when you're visiting with prospective board members, doesn't it make sense to have that conversation around, here's what we're asking our board members to do? Well, all too often, because way too many, I know we got some great nonprofits and they're like the class of the field, excuse me, and they're going to be the models for everyone else here. But all too often, we don't recruit with what I call purpose and process. We're not recruiting ahead. We don't have a list of prospects in our pool that we want to have active, ongoing conversations with as board candidates. So because we aren't intentional, we're pushing off filling board vacancies that we know are coming up. The annual meeting is in January. The last board meeting prior to January was in November. And what's the typical conversation? Well, we've got 2 vacant board seats that we need to fill in January. Does anybody know anybody? Well, it's going downhill at that point. So that hasn't allowed for any conversation and getting clarity. So when you're having this clarity, allow yourself time to have these critical conversations with your prospects. Have the conversation around getting to clarity. And so there's this list of major expectations. You communicate that list. You make sure they're paying attention to what's being communicated, and then you stop talking. You let them ask questions, and so the outcome that you're trying to get to here is not just a one-way. Here's what we want you to do, but you want a two-way conversation initiated so that they're able to ask questions about expectations. You're able to ultimately get acceptance of a willingness to do whatever it is, whether it's fundraising or whatever it is. And here's a critical mistake that all too often we make. We're not listening to the board prospect, Jay. We're focused on getting that slot filled. Because if Jay turns us down, I've still got that slot to fill. So, if we quite often, oh, well, wow, I've really said a lot. We have a lot of expectations, but really, we just want you to do the best you can. Yeah, we have a lot of board meetings, but just show up when you can. Well, what are you doing? You are setting yourself up for failure, right? You are opening the door to a big can of frustration getting opened up. And you're trying to push someone. You've minimized the expectations. Someone might share, well, I'm going back to school. My spouse is we're expecting another child. Someone in the family's been sick. I've got a job change coming up. Life. And we push off they're not objections. They're telling you why they're not a good candidate for serving on your board right now. But again, what are we focused on, Jay? We're focused on filling
those slots.
Slots. So we push a no into a yes. And now all of a sudden they're on I'm going to say yes so Hardy will stop talking, Pete's sake. So now they're on the board. They've already told you they can't do what you're asking them to do, but you're going to spend the rest of their shelf life while they're on the board being frustrated because they're not doing what they're supposed to do, and they told you in advance that they weren't going to be able to do that. Does this make sense?
Right. I think so. And we've got questions that are kind of relating to this, as well as taking us directly into that fundraising kernel, which I know we'll need to talk about in depth. So one of those things is I just want to acknowledge again that Scott had made another interesting comment about board onboarding. And I think that's kind of where part of this is. We're trying to fill a seat. That's one set of expectations. We have a certain number of seats to fill, but another one is, well, what is it that you're really seeking for me to do? And I don't hear that often defined very well. Sometimes there are literally no job descriptions, or the job descriptions are very vague and sometimes purposely so, because we want them to be able to be there for us, but we don't necessarily know what we want them to do. And in fact, Richard had made an interesting comment about this too, that the board members themselves are in that same boat. They're trying to replace themselves before the end of the next term, because they see that as an obligation, or at least a responsibility, to make sure there's somebody else sitting in that chair and keeping it warm when they're gone. So we have all these problems. But on the fundraising front, Hardy, there are a couple things. The first is, I'm interested to know how you feel about the proverbial give, get, or get off or give and get, give or get, all this stuff, especially in relation to something which was mentioned by Joseph, which is that there are people who are coming to our board, sometimes from different backgrounds, different cultures, different experiences, different resource bases. And how can we respect that and weave those people into the board in a way that makes them all valuable to the organization, but also feel valued?
I'm not trying to circumvent the question. I do have opinions about give, get, and get off.
Okay.
But I want to challenge us today to think a little bit differently.
Okay.
Here's the mistake that I see that's made. So if you have that and your organization has it, great, more power to you. If it works, that's great. But let me drop just a little hand grenade into the conversation. Fundraising is not the number one responsibility of a nonprofit board. Period. It's governance. And governance does not equate to fundraising. All right. Different topics. If you want fundraising to be a part of a board member's responsibility, that's great. But here's what happens. Here's where it breaks down. Now, let me, if I could, the context I'm going to share some thoughts with you on are around direct giving, direct solicitation. So not addressing, old school, licking envelopes, putting on stamps, writing, addresses, sharing the old school Rolodex or contact list. I'm not talking about those I'm not talking about buying seats at the signature event or sponsoring a table. I'm not talking about those kind of passive type things. I'm talking about expecting a board member to make direct solicitation ask. Okay. And here's where I see where we go wrong. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but here's the mistakes. Number one, I'm going to suggest that assuming board members are obligated to be fundraisers needs to be given some thought. And here's why. Not everyone is willing to ask someone else for money. And that's just a fact. And so, that's why I'm a member of AFP. I know there are probably a lot of members of AFP. Whenever I'm with my AFP colleagues, there's a reason why AFP exists and CFREs exist. And that's because they get hired to do what no one else on the staff wants to do, including maybe the CEO, maybe the board. Not many people want to ask someone else for money. And I've always been tempted. I've never done it. But even if I'm in a room of fundraisers, I've always been tempted, Jay, to ask the question, how many here really want or happy about asking other people for money? I'm not talking about sending emails. I'm not, doing newsletters. I'm not talking. And I'm gonna think not many will. That's just kind of a fact of life. So, not recognizing that everyone is willing to ask someone else for money is important. That ties back into the conversation earlier about getting clarity, not getting clarity and acceptance on expectations, specifically fundraising expectations. Now, if we have the clarity around, well, we have a give, get, or get off policy, the incoming board member understands that, accepts that, then okay, then you follow up on that. What also happens is that board members have shared with me is when there's, for example, there is that direct fundraising expectation, that when that's not being met, those good board members who are meeting it, they get turned off. So are you willing to do the heavy, dirty work of, okay, well, Jay, you've been on the board for 2 years. You haven't given, you haven't asked, and now it's time to get off. Well, when it comes to dismissing board members, I know there's a theory and concept about all that. The reality is, if you're in a local nonprofit, how real is that? So it's kind of tough. They're all colleagues. They're all probably professional colleagues. They bank with each other. They teach each other's kids. They coach each other's soccer teams. They buy cars from each other, insurance from each other, real estate from each other. So are they really going to fire a board member? And who's going to have that conversation? And it's not going to be good if the expectation is the executive director is supposed to have the conversation. That's not going to be good. It's got to be that board chair. Well, do you have a board chair that's willing to have those tough conversations and follow up on, do the nudges, do the little dings? Well, Hardy, it's time for you to write that check or get one or whatever, or else. So I think it's the concept is okay as long as you set it up with getting clarity on expectations, and then have the enforcement mechanism ready. It's okay, this is it, and we're going to abide by it and roll with it. Does that
So
help?
Hardy, can I push back on that a little bit?
Sure.
So whatever we think about the role of the board in terms of solicitation or even giving and whether or not they should give and how much and all those questions, those are very much an individual matter, I guess, for the organizations. You just talked about the role of the board chair in that, which I found, really persuasive. And wouldn't it be true that the board chair in any organization is going to have to enforce whatever policy there is for the board, even if it has nothing to do with fundraising? If it was like, for example, if there was one golf outing a year and that's all they did, and they expected board members to go and some didn't and the others did, that would really deflate the energy and attention of the really driven, committed board members. So wouldn't it be the role of the board chair to say, whether it's about not having given or not having attended or not having written something, I'm sorry, we're all pitching together here. We all got to raise this barn together. If you can't do that with us, we love you, but it's probably better that you do something different.
Thank and release. Simone Gioio used to talk about thank and release.
Absolutely. Yes, Simone. Yes.
Well, you've just triggered I think an impulse for me to share. There's some important research data that's out there that we as a sector need to take to heart. BoardSource and others have, I like the BoardSource. I followed their leading with intent research. I followed that for years. There's a consistent finding around board knowledge of roles and responsibilities. And there's kind of an average C minus, maybe C plus on a good day, that board members just don't know what they're supposed to do. And every time I see that, Jay, I'm thinking, well, duh. Who is it that is supposed to provide that knowledge? So this gets kind of that look in the mirror kind of a thing. So if your board members don't know what they're supposed to be doing, doesn't that fall back on staff to make sure effective orientations, good recruitment process, continuous training as far as roles and responsibilities. Now, here's something else, another very significant piece of research. Apparently, there is a, very high percentage of incoming board chairs who do not have not had any previous training or experience to take on the role they're about to take on. Now, let that sink in. So that means they could have been chair-elect, they could have been on the board, but they weren't getting any advanced training to help them be a successful board chair, including the kind of training that it takes to get those board members off and moving and playing in that golf tournament. But even more so, think about this. Ideally, especially on a local level, who are we looking for board members? It's probably the top community leaders, the top business leaders in a local community, right? Just because they're successful and making lots of money and hiring lots of people, selling a bunch of stuff, that doesn't mean they know how to effectively lead a nonprofit board of volunteers. Doesn't mean they know how to do that. And I'm going to suggest even something else. Just because Hardy, Jay's our next chair, he's going to be good because he's been the chair of 10 other local nonprofits. Well, was he any good at it? Right? Just because he was the chair, was he any good at it? And does he have the skill set necessary for group meeting facilitation, all those kind of things? So what does your board chair need to do to be an effective? How can you prepare him? What conferences, training sessions does that board chair, what does she need to be sent to get the training that she needs? And then, have that list of expectations as a checklist. And again, that one-on-one communication, just ask, well, here are situations that come up typically that we would look to the board chair for guiding us through a particular set of circumstances. Do you have a background that will help prepare you for that? Or would you like some additional training for that? So we kind of set ourselves up for failure by we're telling ourselves, the sector tells ourselves on a regular basis, well, those board members just don't know what they're supposed to do. But we blame them for not doing it. And
Hardy,
then our board chairs aren't prepared.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Hardy, somebody had asked in the Q&A for a link to that research. That's BoardSource, correct, that you're referring to?
Yes, BoardSource.
Yes.
And you can go to the BoardSource site. Okay. I don't know if it's boardsource.com or boardsource.org, but just Google BoardSource. That's my go-to fail-safe, BoardSource.
And so, Jack, if you can source that and put that in the chat, that'd be great. And if not, we'll make sure to include it in the follow-up communication that you all will be receiving about this session that comes to you by email. So you should be receiving that by tomorrow. If you don't receive it, look in your spam folder.
That particular research that BoardSource does, it's an every 2 year. They're into their 2024 research now. Leading with intent.
There's something
is the name of that report.
That's right, Leading with Intent. Thank you so much. I'd forgotten the name too. There's something that strikes me about all this, which is that you're having this conversation with us. We really don't know the breakdown of how many people might be serving now or in the past, or maybe even in the future on a board, and how many are in a staff role. And I'm not sure the chat will allow us to really figure that out very concretely. So I won't ask. That's kind of that would be a difficult poll. But the reason why I'm mentioning this is that I don't see conferences often where we bring these two parties together. It's sort of like the difference between the academic research that's done by Arnova and ISTR, and I'm in love with that stuff, versus what happens over here in our world as practitioners. And they call us practitioners, a phrase that a term we don't even know what it means half the time. But that's what's happening. We've got donors. Often then that donor class is one of those crazy terms people use, serving on our boards. We've got a group of staff who often feel like they don't have the resources, the time to do things, including often give. And then we've got people studying us from afar. How do we get these people in a room? I mean, because what you just talked about with board member expectations, with staff expectations, people not knowing how to be a board member. And frankly, as we know, many fundraising staff not knowing how to do fundraising until they're hired for their first fundraising job. You've got a lot of people thrown into this thing trying to figure it out. How do we get them together, sitting down at tables, working this out?
Well, and that's, what a great question and excellent observation. And I see the post about AFP Houston about best practices for boards, and that's awesome. So, the idea is to go from the two fingers of blame in the blame game to two hands working together collaboratively, right? In that's what we're trying to get to here. So it's about having those conversations and let the conferences that you attend just give them that feedback that you'd like, welcome opportunities. Now I will share with you, quite often I'm brought in to conferences to talk about these very same issues, and it's made very clear that the audience will be for the professionals, and they want to talk about the board members. And then there are other occasions when it's very clear the audience will be board members and they want to talk about the professionals, right? So it is about that collaborative approach. And I think if organizations can take a look at that. Again, treat your boards as high value assets. Rethink, make your meetings matter. Rethink how meetings are structured so that they're not just get in and get out. Volunteers today want to know that their time matters, that any activity that they're participating in on a volunteer basis, something is going to happen. So is something happening as a result of your meeting, or is the meeting just report? There's no time for interaction. If there's no time for interaction, there's no time for relationship building. And it's hard to build relationships and work collaboratively together on maybe a capital fundraising project if I really don't know who those other people are. They don't know me. So there's a need for having that time to build connection. Connection builds relationships. Relationships builds engagement. There is a cycle to that. That will make a big difference. Use another quick tip. Use planning as an engagement tool. All too often in the world of nonprofit, that's a whole nother topic. We just don't even want to talk about planning. We just, yeah, it's good. Sure. I'm sure it is, but we don't have time for that. But then okay, you're going to go into the weekend. I got to do a strategic plan. I'll present it to the board on Monday. I'm watching my favorite teams, got my favorite snacks. I'm going to knock out a do-it-yourself quick strategic plan, and it could be a very good plan. And it's got all kind of action steps you're expecting board members to take, right? Well, you roll that out on Monday, of course, because you worked on it all weekend, and there wasn't time to send it to the board for feedback. Mm-hmm. Where do you think this is going to go? Whose plan is it? If your board members are not participating in the development of the plan, whose plan is it? And they may ratify, they say, sure, I'll make a motion, we approve the plan. All those in favor say aye. The plan is approved. I haven't committed to anything, right. Nothing. I've got a great friend, Chancellor Dr. Jack Hawkins at Troy University, that told me a long time ago, Hardy, if they help bake the cake, they own the cake. So if you can use strategic planning as an engagement tool and keep your plan before, so let's just, because it's simple math for me, Jay, if you meet once a month and you got 6 priority goals for 2024, I think that means that every other month you could allow time in your board meeting to address the one priority item. Thank you for sharing that, Robin. Addressing one priority item and have a fully robust conversation around that. Are we making progress? Do we need to adjust? What are the action plans? What's the situation that we're in? You see what I'm saying? So the strategic plan actually stays alive. It doesn't go sit on a shelf someplace. And because board members have participated and were engaged, does it make sense that they're going to be more willing to actually implement what's in the plan from a board member standpoint? Does that make sense?
I know we're coming almost to the end of the hour. I have kind of a quick question for you. It may be hard to answer, but we started by talking about NASCAR, and it sounds like there was a lot of work to make things work really efficiently and well, and you kept revisiting them every single race and probably every single thing in between every single race. But one thing we seem to lack, one of the many things we seem to lack in the nonprofit space, is a finish line. That
Yes.
so what we know who the winner and the loser is. We don't like to think of any of us in our sector as losers, of course, because we're all
Right.
working for the common good. But we don't necessarily have a defined finish line either. And your point about plans, the plan might be, well, let's do at least as well as we did last year, maybe a little
Sure.
more.
Sure.
Is there a way that we can, for ourselves, develop some finish lines so that we can get the people, like you said before, in the back office and the driver's seats together, and then make sure we pass that finish line together at the end of the year?
What a great question. I've actually got goosebumps here. I don't know if that shows up on the Zoom or not, but the nonprofit world, everyone who is in the audience today, every single person are extremely special individuals. If we did a personality assessment on everyone in the audience today, I know what the result would be. Everyone would be a caring, sharing, very passionate individuals about your particular cause. I understand that. And there is no finish line. I've never really thought about it in that way, Jay. So now you're making me think about another direction there. But it's hard. It's very hard. And it's in even going through a pandemic situation, which made it even worse. It hasn't gotten any better. There is no finish line. The need obviously keeps growing and growing and growing, and there's no end in sight, regardless of the cause you're committed to. The resources are shrinking, and resources, just depending on whatever the news headline is of the day, get shifted. And it's kind of, I think there's a mislabeling in some of those headlines about, well, philanthropy stayed equal in 2023. Well, maybe in overall dollars, maybe yes, but we all know there's winners and losers, and there's great shifting going on in donor decision making. So where someone used to write 10 $1,000 checks every single year, now they're writing one check for $10,000. Well, there's one good winner and there's 9 losers. So that's tough. Here's what I'm suggesting: that if you can work with your board and get them involved, again, as a high value asset, and helping solve the problems and the challenges, taking some of that burden off you and your individual staff. And I know from a scale standpoint, we've probably got one person shops, and we've got shops here today with maybe hundreds of people, but the level of challenge still exists. It's just a scale. But I'm suggesting utilize that board, and it's an underutilized asset. So if I might, some quick hitters to just really help tie in the fundraising aspect, Jay. If you want fundraisers, to tie in the earlier conversation, if you want fundraisers, okay, get fundraisers. How do you do that? Do your homework and do what you as a professional fundraiser already do on a daily basis, prospect research. So just apply the principles of good donor prospect research to board members, potential board members. What's their history? Are they large donors, medium-sized donors? They're good for buying a raffle ticket, and what is it that you need? I've also seen that passion doesn't always, 100% of the time, translate into an ability to raise significant amounts of money. Now, in a lot of cases, that is the secret sauce, but in some cases, it's not. So it just depends. So do that homework. That's a couple of final tips. How many to a prospective board member? How many other commitments do they have? So if they're already an active donor, okay, good. But how many times, if you're expecting them to do direct solicitation and they're committed to 9 other groups or causes, do they have the bandwidth, the capacity? Do their friends, their clients, their customers, their family, do they have the capacity? Oh, great. Jay's on another board and we get to write another check. All right. You may want to work a little harder on your prospecting. Don't get the person who's already maybe overcommitted. Find some new blood, find some new faces, some new energy, and they're there. They're there. It just takes a little extra work. And then one last thought about fundraisers. If you want fundraisers on your board and your board members aren't fundraising, I'm going to suggest you got the wrong people. So go back to the beginning, recruit board members with purpose and process, be intentional, and get the board members that you want, especially when it comes to fundraising. Does this help?
Thank you so much for all of this, Hardy. And I also want to thank everybody in the audience who've been so participatory. We've referenced a lot of your comments without mentioning your names because otherwise we wouldn't have had time to have this conversation with Hardy. But I want to thank all of you, especially Carol, for that last comment about taking this to heart. That means a great deal to us here in this series when some of what our guests have had to share is meaningful to you. And since this is kicking off the year with a subject that seems to be to everybody's constant consternation, it really means a lot. So thank you, Hardy. If people want to get your book, I know this should be obvious, but where should they get it?
Amazon. Just go to Amazon. That's the place. You just search, go to Amazon, type in the search, stop the nonprofit board blame game. It's going to jump right up there, and you probably can have it tomorrow if you're a Prime member.
And how can they learn more about you or maybe see you out there when you're giving a speech, something like that?
Thank you so very much. I'm constantly traveling the country on my quest to share lessons from the book on how to help make boards more positive, productive, and more engaged. My website, very simple, hardysmith.com.
hardysmith.com. We'll make sure that's both in the chat and it already is there. Thank you very much, Jack. We'll make sure that's included in the show notes. Thank you, Hardy, for a great kickoff to the year. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out with us. And do stay tuned for just a minute. You're going to see a little link so you can learn more about donors. Just in the same way that Hardy was suggesting is always a good thing to do when you're thinking about board members, if you want board members who are also going to be in a position and have the passion and care for your mission to give. we will be having lots and lots of sessions this year. We want to have these revolved around your needs and interests. We've had a couple suggestions already today. You're going to see a short survey at the end. Please fill it out so we'll know what you want. And in addition, feel free to reach out to me anytime. You can find me on LinkedIn, or you can find me via my DonorSearch address, which is that's Jay, at DonorSearch.net. We'll look forward to seeing you next week on Tuesday. Until then, take care. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Jay.
Hardy.
Thank you, everyone.